does garbage collection impact my day?
Why can't I have dessert for breakfast?
Should I use percentiles or averages?
Why do clocks help you?
What's up with the number 42? What is the n+1 problem? Can exceptions ever be useful?
Why don't developers like me?
Why does Grandma smell funny?
Ask Perf Bites. Today's Ask Perf Bites episode is sponsored by Neotis. Neotis develops NeoLoad, the fastest and most automated load testing tool on the market. Design and maintain load tests 10 times faster than with any other tool, so your performance testing smoothly fits in Agile and DevOps. Learn more at www.neotis.com. That's Neotys.com. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Ask Perf Bites. It's been a minute, hasn't it? I'm your host, Brian Wilson, and yes, I do simply walk into Mordor. This episode's question comes from Stain. Stain asks Perf Bites, in the context of SAFe, where does the responsibility of performance, reliability, and scalability lie? Well, thank you for your question, Stain. To help us answer this question, I'd like to introduce not one guest, but two guests tonight. Mark Tomlinson, the host of Perf Bites, and Leandro Melendez, host of Perf Bites Español. Howdy, fellas.
Hola. How are you, amigos?
Hola.
Bien. ¿Y tú?
Mucho bien. Muy bien.
Muy bien.
Very happy to be here and back helping, collaborating, and helping people.
Wonderful, wonderful. What about you, Mark? Are you happy to be here? Or is this an obligation for you today?
Well, I live in a risk-averse life. So whenever somebody invites me to talk about things that are safe, I'm good with that. Because it was like the 90s. Remember, TLC was all like safe sex and that kind of stuff. And yeah.
You always go somewhere bizarre, Mark. It's always the fun part of having you on.
I always end up in the 90s at some point.
You do.
Yeah,
we all end
that's
up in
kind
the
of
90s.
scary in and of itself.
Here's a quick tidbit before we go in, because this is going to fascinate the listeners, right? You remember the show The Wonder Years, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I don't remember the exact dates. I think The Wonder Years might have aired. I forget when it aired. Maybe whatever. Basically, it was about... It aired 20 years after it was supposed to be taking place.
Yeah. So
right?
it was like late 80s, mid 90s. I think 93 it was done.
Yeah.
But it was supposed to be set
in like 66, 67, whatever.
Wasn't it supposed to be pick up where the Brady Bunch left off?
I don't know. But the crazy thing is, though, is if they were to make a Wonder Years today, it would take place in the year 2000.
Oh, yeah.
No, 2000.
Cool.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's like crazy. Anyway,
hey, what was the theme song for the Wonder Years?
Was Joe Cocker? Yeah. Anyway,
exactly. A little help with my friends, yeah.
and I have a little help from my friends.
You do have help with your friends today.
Not necessarily going to get high, but we're going to get high on SAFe and performance knowledge today, right?
Yeah.
That's my drug is performance. All right.
Yeah.
So the question, right? We're talking about. Agile, kind of lean and agile and all this stuff in performance. But, the big question here is around this idea of SAFe. I have to admit, when I first got it, I didn't know what SAFe was because my testing career had ended before this stuff kind of get introduced. So for everyone out there who may or may not be familiar with SAFe, why don't we start with defining what that is and explaining it?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Done.
Yay.
Mark, would you like to take a crack at describing SAFe for us?
I will. And it's SAFe in and of itself, which is actually capital S, capital A, capital F, lowercase e. So the marketing department has gotten in the typescript there. It's really important.
Yeah.
Is part of Scaled Agile. And Scaled Agile, as an organization, grew out of the popularity of the lean enterprise and sort of lean operations. And lean anything, lean IT, lean operations, lean technology, which if you put it under a really big generic umbrella, it is business agility, meaning are we manifesting all of the promises of that old Agile manifesto with all of the refinements and improvements that worked for the business, not just something in software development. And then particularly SAFe, if you think about it, is a scalable agile framework or a scaled agile framework, meaning if you're a small team in a startup, Brian, like you have like 6 or 7 people and all of you might work in an agile way because there's very little overhead, right?
Yeah.
Because you're kind of sitting right next to each other, and okay, you're going to do this, then I go to lunch, and I know what you're got a dentist appointment, then I'm doing this, then we'll do the database thing. We'll all get together at 4, and the thing that happens naturally in small group dynamics that makes agile extreme programming really sexy and cool. When you bring it into a large organization with a couple hundred people or more doing an agile implementation with multiple different work streams, that's when there's a lot more overhead between all of the individual players. And so one of the things I think that SAFe as a framework sought to do was, how can you scale agile practices and the disciplines and things and the experience of it to very, very much larger organizations working in parallel. And so that's, if you can learn all about it at scaledagile.com. It's actually very comprehensive, and you can imagine it's been adopted by business leadership who said, my competition is agile and they're lean and they can react and they can go after market conditions and blah, blah, blah. And so that's very sexy to the management consultants to come in and say, we'll help you do agile.
Yeah. So let me ask a question on this, though, because obviously what you're talking about, the small team, is the concept people might hear otherwise of like the 1 pizza, 2 pizza team, right? Where you have now when you're talking about scaling it, just for my own clarity and maybe anybody else out there, are you saying scaling, you have a large organization, so you're going to learn how to make a bunch of small teams that can then work in parallel? Or are you talking about taking the practices that small team does and having one large team somehow manage that practice? Because I'm assuming it's the first option, because I don't.
It is the first option. And,
okay.
And one way to make sense of it is if you and I were on a 1 pizza team, if the three of us, the 3 amigos right here on the podcast, were in a 1 pizza team, I could basically just not even turn my head, and you guys get to know me every day that I'm in the office sitting in our little cube area and we're working on our thing. So I almost don't have to speak for you to say, oh, Mark's not having a very good day. Mm-hmm. So how do we help as a team come together to make that happen? If there's 400 of us,
right,
there's 395 other people that aren't as familiar with me on the 20 or 30 pizza team. So you start having to hire people to hold and convey that information that the 3 of us just can kind of assume and enjoy working in a small group dynamic.
Right.
And to me, that's the thing that really tears large implementations of Agile apart. Is it's this intangible, amorphous. I kind of got a vibe from Leandro because I know him. And maybe we need to, hey, let's take a break. Let's do something else as a team. Let's prioritize something different. Let's work in different ways. And that communication goes out the window when you just can't do that. So you have to hire these other people to float around. There's agile leadership. You've got coaches. You've got scrum masters. You've got people then in between. So there's the agile leadership, which is fairly lean, but they start having connective tissue across work streams. And it's pretty elaborate in that way. Yeah.
Right. Leandro, anything from you, or was that a learning experience for you as it was for me?
Yeah, it was. I have to admit, it was mostly a learning experience. I had been working on safe environments and projects, but Mark just clarified why some things were happening in the way that. Those mysterious ways that I notice, I'm like, why are they doing things that way? Who is that guy trying to, the liaison in between our teams and peculiar things that were going on, trying to integrate all of this. So it's enlightening. And if I could do a short version, it's like an extending or putting together multiple agile teams and making them able to work in large organizations, for what I'm following.
Yeah. You can the other way to think about it, just not to belabor the point, but you can imagine there's big non-agile companies over the last 15 years who are like, we're going to be agile tomorrow. Let's just get me some of that agile, take it off the shelf and just install it. And so So if you really look, if you go to their site, and even the kind of simplified but yet very complex, if you can say that, you can see how they've taken different parts of traditional ITSM and sort of agilized it in a way. They're still represented there. There's still Scrum kind of in one little section. There's a lot of customer touch points in another part. There's still the business and the portfolio group that's running, like the program office that's running the backlog of everything and product owners. And then there's, people actually doing a continuous pipeline versus just there's devs that go build stuff and ops that deploy stuff. Now, and here's a release manager wearing a hat. They actually just sort of change the words to be, all right, let's do that part in a continuous fashion because that's cool. Ops is now DevOps. That's cool. We've got some team backlogs as in business, as well as there are product backlogs, so you can absorb technical debt. So they've thought about a lot of the headaches or challenges that, kind of old school enterprise IT have got to face in order to become more agile.
Yeah, and I the whole time you were talking, I got to tell you, I couldn't stop thinking about Agile in a box coming on 5 floppy disks. So
I just restore from tape.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, exactly. But Stain had a slightly
more
pointed question.
Yes,
right?
exactly. So he was talking about, where does taking from his words, what does the responsibility of performance, reliability, and scalability lie in that framework? Why don't we dive into that? Or really, I'm telling you all to dive into it.
Leandro, do you want to talk recently how you've been pulled in to some of the engagements you've been on where there's some semblance of this architecture being employed?
When you were saying right now that these safe implementations are kind of a gateway drug to an actual agile, to be companies trying to get involved and trying to implement agile methodologies. The performance part of the solutions, or trying to create awareness, responsibility, and trying to take care of it. It has been an interesting experience because it doesn't depart so much from what I was able to implement or what I see that was being done. It's not very different to how you manage it on just general agile teams when on the places that I have seen it working, because some others, it has been attempted to direct the performance management, optimization, testing, checking, everything around performance to be like an instruction, a law, or something that everyone has to follow. And the risk in that way, when it's a big organization and someone very, very high and above says like, yeah, the performance rules will be this. And as a silly example, but I saw it happen several times, was like, I don't want any process going above 2 or 3 seconds in response time, any single process in the whole organization, where there were some pieces where it got a bit ridiculous from my perspective and it didn't help that much. But on the other side, I think also that's where Stain was coming from, is that some other organizations is like, yeah, it's agile, we don't have time for this, everything is load tests, and we don't have sprint by sprint with all the different teams. How are we going to ever going to run a full load test amongst all the moving pieces around the organization? How we ever going to pull this off? We're not even going to pay attention to it. So it's a complex task. It's I don't even think that there's like this is the way that it should be done.
Yeah. Now, in your engagement, who were the players that you would think on a large agile team that you from a performance standpoint, let's just start at the beginning of the process, putting together objectives or requirements or things for a feature or an epic. Who did you end up working with in the landscape?
Well, at the beginning, the approach of the team was to try to put me to talk with the developers, sometimes with the Scrum Master, at times just redirecting from the users. But in the end, I think, or in my experience, what ended up working the best was with the product owners, generating some sort of awareness with them, not only in terms of, first of all, what is important in performance testing, not just load testing, but to be aware of where are the problems that your application and your daily check-ins are generating, or daily when they happen. Some other times the twice a week sprint check-in, hardening sprints even.
Yeah.
And this product owner is the one that started to say, hey, when you create the requirements or the new features, add performance, add some sort of indications. And at those moments when you were creating those requirements or putting the cute post-its with the information, at that moment you could start discussing, hey, this is a feature that I think it could take this amount of time. We should check in terms of performance, these items on a single user, single thread response time, and this might not even require a load test. This duration might be good, might be bad. Some of those items that, when they are taken into account from the very beginning, are, in my experience, way better.
Yeah. I think, Brian, the first answer I have for Stain is based partially on what Leandro is saying. And for an engineer, let's say, I really think a lot of these the SAFe framework works hierarchically based on tenure and experience. And every time I've encountered it, there's always, those levels in a company. You're a manager, you're a senior this, you're an architect. And if you're like, I'm a load tester or performance tester. Let's say I'm a developer that does performance engineering. Maybe I'm a DevOps guy or person. And if I'm more hands-on, you're going to end up being in the essential technical parts of a SAFe framework around the pipeline and working in the Scrum. You'll have a Kanban board of your own with a set of stories that are just around performance automation, performance monitoring work. And then if you're in Leandro's shoes, you're moving to, all right, I have a particular work stream for a feature or an epic or a set of work. So Leandro's a little bit more senior, like a lead of the load testing team or the performance team. And so he's starting to work with business owners and kind of connect the dots between subject matter experts, a product owner, as he said, and even business owners to try to establish what's a really robust understanding of the performance aspects of the story. Again, those are still sort of in the essential layer of the framework. A more senior performance person, I'm not saying I have tons of experience, but you have to be able to go from the essential, hey, I'm sweating out Load Runner or JMeter every day of my life, but I also need to talk to like an enterprise architect and look at like big time leadership, like the actual business portfolio, like what are all the different technologies that we're doing? How much of them on a greater architecture? What's the cost structure? Will it scale for performance characteristics across all the apps? And someone will come along and say, well, I was on a business trip here and I think we should move everything to Azure, la, la, la. And next thing you know, you've got marching orders that tell you it's going to be better in Azure. All right, well, let's make some enterprise architectural decisions about what patterns we need to be successful, and then call up Leandro and say, hey, when you're thinking about the performance for these new applications, think about monitoring them with, say, Azure Service Bus or Azure Hubs, Event Hubs, different kinds of SQL storage. Or you're going to switch to a Java application on AWS or something like that. So the idea, I think, for who's responsible to Stains, the first question is, it depends at what level you're working as a performance person, as a performance consultant, advisor. Because there's product. I mean, if you look at that image, just the simple image at their website.
Simple image.
I mean, it's got everything in there, right? But product management, business owners, and let's say that's just one slice for one work stream. You could have 40 different application groups.
Yeah.
And each of them having 9 or 10 active epics running with existing code base, greenfield opportunities for applications, and they all have business owners. And so you need to be able to, like Leandro, you probably jump around between several different product owners depending on, what the whole picture looks like, right?
Yeah. Many different applications that are being developed parallel, that are interconnecting between each other. And probably they have even separate releases, different team structures. It gets interesting.
Yeah. So to go the next step, I think when Stain's what's maybe if I take a hint as to what's in Stain's world, it's who has the power to make performance important in this whole, because in a larger organization, it's very easy to pass the buck. Well, I thought Jim did that. Well, Mary took care of that. I don't know. To go talk to Susan. And that's probably the biggest challenge, is that it gets atomized, right? Fragmented. Mm-hmm. You go around to this person, the next person, the next person, and there's only, they only have part of the picture. Whereas in a small team, you can say, guys, we need this to scale on N number of machines, just as an idea. Throw spaghetti on the wall, see what sticks. Yeah. And, you can all be part of that discussion. Again, in a large organization at scale, that falls apart. So I think you would look at the organizational power of the product owner, which I think Leandro is right on with saying that's probably the best place to go. A technical product owner, if there is one, is probably also very good. I am still kind of one of the old school guys that has one leg upstream with architecture and the product teams in development in the business. And I have the other leg in operations and deployment. So release managers are usually my best friend. They have a lot of power to say what gets in, what the risk is, and what's not going to get in.
Right.
And then also when things go really wrong in operations, knowing what the people in production support and production operations, that's your other source of power. I think it also changes this, to Stain's point, is if he's asking us legitimately this question, Brian, that, where can you find who's responsible and whatever? Well, in a really large team, the truth be told, your challenge as a lead, like Leandro's being a lead, a performance lead for a greater project, and it could be across applications, it's you. And it's so much harder to be taken seriously in these other realms. So let's say you've spent your whole life with your head buried in the view gen and you just love databases. Well, what if you talking to a product owner who was a front-end developer and they didn't really, that's not really their jam, and you can't really have a common language. Well, I got to build new skills and have different kinds of communication skills, and you may have to find new vehicles to carry the importance to the business around performance. So right. It might not just be, here's my performance requirement on a story, we need 4 seconds. You need to be able to communicate why 4 seconds, what happens if it's not 4 seconds. You need to be able to say that until you're blue in the face to 100 people. Right. And then finally somebody will say, hey, did Brian come and talk to you about do you understand? I only got this much. And then you finally kind of create a buzz around something. And if you repeat it enough, suddenly, hopefully you get called into a meeting where everyone says, well, I don't know what the heck with Brian was. Can somebody go get Brian? Get him in here. And, and you'll end up in the meeting going, is everyone here that we're supposed to be less than 4 seconds on this report?
I just said 4 seconds because I made it up.
I made it up. And the truth is, what do you guys think it should be? Yeah. And suddenly everyone's in the same room at the same time because you've created a buzz. So your approach at scale for carrying the message of performance, the importance of performance, and what it means, if it's valuable, that changes a lot as well at scale.
And I think part of that ties to getting allies on your side. As you mentioned earlier, you would want to get either a product owner or business owner to understand the meaning of that 4 seconds, let's say, or whatever the performance criteria, how does that translate to the business? How does that translate to the product? How does that translate to the bottom line? And how does that translate to the customer so that they will then turn around and say, I like what you're saying, and I'm going to help ask those questions along with you. Or whenever someone's talking about the product, or whatever project we're working on, they might then turn around and say, well, what's the performance outlook for this? Maybe they don't know exactly what they're talking about, but they're going to mention it because they understand what you're talking about, because, I think it's your job to educate them about how performance ties into that bottom line and really make them an ally and even a champion for your cause.
Yeah.
I think a little, also based on my experience, as Mark was saying, that you have to start to establish some sort of alliances and friendships. In my case, literally the role was named an evangelist. And as it was said, when you were saying it, it's like I was there, being pulled in a meeting, explain us this performance thing, why are we having problems? And to Stain's questions, it's interesting because sometimes you just have to go around like Chicken Little screaming into people like, hey, this performance thing is important, you should pay attention because of this, that, or this other thing. And often you don't know in whose ears this is going to resonate. And others will be like, yeah, that guy, like the crazy preacher of the town shouting at something, like he's again screaming. And it's very interesting because I even had some of those experiences, some product owners where I started to, we helped to habilitate notifications so that the product owner will know when some components were slow or deviating from that. And the developers didn't want it to pay attention to that. And that product owner loved it. He was like, oh my God, I can notice when something is getting slow or not performing. When in the other hand, there was another product owner where we enabled something similar. The developers loved it, started to pay attention to that and tried to be careful with it. And these notifications were being sent through email to these product owners. And the other one that did not like that much even wrote me like, hey, why am I receiving these emails? Can I be taken off from this list? My first reaction was like, dude, you're the first person that should be interested in it. And you're the first one asking to not to be bothered by it. So it's also a way how you can whisper into people's ears. And again, in line to Stein's question, I think that there's no single responsibility as the performance person in that organization or team. You're responsible to trying to create awareness and make people to help you when there's something, because sometimes you end up being also like a puppeteer, as Mark said, like, hey, I have someone that helps me on ops when the product owner doesn't want to pay attention, or vice versa, and trying to keep peace, world peace around the situations. Yeah. I don't know.
And so I want to take, because I've been listening to a lot of this, and I wanted to go out on a limb and I think encapsulate what you're saying, but not so much as a summary. But obviously, a lot of what you're talking about, both of you, is something where the higher, I don't want to say higher end, but the performance person who's working at a much higher level, who has more of the responsibility and ownership of the teams and everything else, I can see that very easily falling on their shoulders. However, let's talk about the person writing the script, the load script.
Sure. I
think, obviously that level of responsibility can't sit on their shoulders, so they don't have that exposure to everybody. But I think whose responsibility is it? It always comes down to being everybody's responsibility. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, even for the person who's just writing the scripts, oftentimes that person is consulting with the developers on their scripts, because maybe something isn't working right and they need to figure out from the developer, what fields are these, or, whatever it needs to be that they need to go to the developer for. And every time you have to interact with somebody else to figure out how to complete your script or make sure your script is exercising properly against the system. We've talked in other previous episodes about, do you use all random terms? Do you use weighted terms? All that kind of stuff, right? By understanding how the application works, every time you're talking to those people about that, it's a good idea to also pepper in some concepts of, how performance is and how performance is going to benefit them, and how finding those issues earlier on in the cycle is beneficial for them, as opposed to waiting until you get to production. And then they might start talking about, oh, well, yeah, I mean, it would be great to know if, I always use the N+1 query issue because it's such an easy one. But oh, if you can tell me what that does to the load if I add 3 more database calls to this function here, that'd be really helpful. Sure. And because you have the people at the higher levels working on the higher level people and the people down working in the trenches, spreading that word, evangelizing, as Leandro said, to the other people in the trenches. And then everyone starts getting involved in it. But Mark, I don't know if you have any comments on that at all, or if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Well, I do. I think we should cover some of the gotchas that Stain's probably at,
right,
particularly to what you're saying. If you think about the key word around safe is lean. Mm-hmm. Remember the lean, all of the sentiments and the tenets of sort of lean development, lean operations, and the big, huge load test at the end of the project is the polar opposite of lean.
Right.
So if anyone that is even still alive today working in performance work and thinking that they're going to get, that old Big Bang load test that represents the real world, we're doing more like rocket science and estimation and extrapolation. Mm-hmm. And also the developer sitting right next to you is like, but I'm not building all 400 features by next Thursday. I have to get performance numbers on the 3 that I have in front of me. And so when you're working as a scripter or a very small, a small scope focus, a very keen focus around a story or even a collection of stories within the epic, on a sprint, you may be wanting to give performance numbers in a very different context from what the meaning is to the big picture. So that's where I would say the gotcha is that somebody says, well, you're not ready for me to test, I'll just wait. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, you know what, if you have 3 functions, I'll just grab your unit test and I'll run 10 threads of your unit test, and let's just do that on every check-in throughout the course of the 2 weeks of the sprint.
Yeah.
And we get some ideas here that, and we, like you say, with N+1 is a perfect example. It's not even resource consumption. It's just number of calls.
Yeah.
Oh, on Thursday, now there's 1,000 times more calls being made behind that component. And so it changes. If you're kind of like an old school Vuegen GUI scripting kind of person, even if you did web scripting with a whole product, log in, go through the steps, mm-hmm. and everything is there and integrated, that doesn't exist. And in fact, if you look within the SAFe framework, there's a whole section for the larger solutions coming together and giving demos and doing very large scale demos, which is sort of has a lot to do with the business buy-in, right? Yeah. So are we still on track? As in Agile is always like, don't waste, and Lean is like, let's check in and be able to release something to prove or disprove whether, we're still on target to make money in the market or whatever our objectives are as an organization. So when you're working as a scripter, you might be like, hey, I have a special team that does, sort of dogfight load testing for this demo so that when we do a demo, it's actually running with 1,000 concurrent users hitting those same components, even though we're just going through a slice of the architecture. Yeah. And you might be proving or disproving like a scale vector, saying this over n number of threads can scale better than this other architecture for doing the same data transform. So you could look at one has a better scalability curve, meaning you could do more transactions at the same throughput, more transactions with the same speed under load. So you could be doing that at a very small level, which is, again, very different than you have to tell me that this whole big picture system will scale that's where human beings were like, wow, this is all so huge and so complex. Yeah. There is no one answer. So that's the gotcha I think Stain might want to go after is there's no Big Bang load testing. It also changes the tools. That's the biggest thing. Like you look at, take any diagnostic profiling tool and the ability to test early on in the pipeline, the whole shift left world. Yep. I mean, this is exactly where you need to be able to do that and not get lost in all the noise.
Yeah, I think it's also important on those levels to understand what acceptable architecture looks like and what it doesn't. Right? Again, just going back to the N+1 query problem, if you're testing a login functionality and that fires off 100 database calls, without even seeing a regression of that changing, that's the kind of thing that should start setting off alarms. And that's the kind of thing you learn from experience and or just even talking to the developers or talking to the operations team or the support teams. Like, what's going to happen if every time someone logs in, we have to make 100 calls? And if you only do that 10 thread test, you're still going to see you're going to see 10 times 100, come on, 1,000 calls to the database for login, right?
Deviation.
But, that's going to trigger you. That should be informing you to like going back to what you're saying, you're not running that Big Bang load test, but you can get enough information from small tests to know if something's really off or not really not off. And then there's ways you can make these small incremental things to check and see how things are going to go. And then obviously, you're shifting left on the testing there, right? But then you need to always go back to what does this look like in production? And what are the metrics that we're collecting in production? How does this translate so you can start piecing that all together so that you know what this pattern looks like when it runs in real load in production. And that then informs you to understand what the next one's going to look like in production to know whether or not to raise the flag and say, hey, I know we're only running with 10 threads, but this is going to be an issue based on what we saw before and how we see it in production.
Yeah. So I think it's another good gotcha there is to be able to communicate clearly what you didn't test. Be very clear, like this does not show confidently X and Y, but it does show that A and B is doing pretty good. Yeah. And then be able to say, this is just one iteration. This is just one sprint out of many. So if we can just keeping our focus and keep in mind, hopefully we're not architecting a monolith because that's where that behavior you'd get lost. Because if I test A and B, well, A and B are going to get compiled into a binary that's this huge giant monolith running in some central. A and B are always going to be standalone microservices, and if we need more of them, there'll be a Kubernetes cluster elastically expanding multiples of A and B. So it's when people get confused like that old school stuff, that's like, oh, who's responsible for this? Well, actually, the people that built A and B are going to get pushed into production. They're going to get used. They can scale, and we can do it at small, and we'll monitor it when it gets big, and that's what the DevOps world's about. And so that's the thing that I think is really what if people aren't listening to me when I tell them I know how this stuff should be built in the big picture, and you're in a scaled agile framework where everyone around you has lots of little A's and B's. Yeah. You're talking about the big monolith in that language style falls apart. No one has the power. To Stain's question, nobody in the whole safe framework has the single point of power to say, thou shalt not build it this way. Because we're not building a monolith. We're building lots of little things. If you want to run, Leandro, you probably run into this. You've got the same system. It's like these guys wrote some stuff in Node. Those guys wrote some stuff in Java. They did some stuff in a different framework. They got some React framework here, some old Silverlight people there. And you as a load tester, you need to run around and be able to script in all those different protocols and things and get your work done, right?
Yeah, I had many of those situations where I think one of the main challenges or roadblocks that I walked into trying to do all of these things, it's first of all the confusion in between the terms for performance testing, load testing, and as you say, the Big Bang load tests for a monolith, where to many management levels sound to be the same. And that is the thought or the requirement that someone would be responsible to do this big bang load test, automate everything, and have for these organizations that may have so many different pieces moving around. And many requests that I have received is like, I just want to do this big load test for the application where some of the unit tests, some of the plus ones, some of the little functions the organization doesn't even know where are performance tested, because you're testing the performance, you're measuring it, and you know how it does regardless of the size. I used to give this example as evangelist or trying to translate. They were trying to test, the application was a racing car, and they were trying to test it on the road, where I was like, you have multiple teams that are putting the pieces, super efficient fuel tank that you can fill up in little time, tires that you can change, and you don't even know until you are actually racing the car how it is going to behave. Yeah. And you have to test each one of the parts separately. And let's say it starts raining. Well, you have to change the tires, and you don't even test the car on a raining environment. I dare you to try to get a track when it's raining so you can test your car on a full load test with those special tires. And you just need to be prepared and have your separated tires tested on their own for rain environments, and just get blessing trying to say, okay, I did my best on the tires separately. The car is running well right now on the track. It started raining. Let's put the raining tires and hope for the best. And that's the same. You cannot just pull off big load tests and try to guess everything. It has to be incremental, little by little, and shared by all the team. The guy with the fuel tank is responsible for that part and should keep in mind that it has to perform the best possible. And the people changing the brakes, the tires, the wheel, it's a shared responsibility.
Yeah, awesome.
That brings me to another question then with this. I think the answer to this question is yes, because I think it would make the job of someone in performance much more fun. But that's because I selfishly would want to add the extra fun to it. Using your example partially there, Leandro, and going back to the A's and B's and all the microservices, how much responsibility do you think it is for people in the performance team to advocate for production releases to be done as canary releases, feature flags, A/B tests, whatever, partial rollouts, testing, collection, verifying before releasing it to the whole? Because that's really, if we're going to be talking about this lean, agile, safe, I'll throw all the acronyms together. Why not? The methodology here, you're not really going to be having very much opportunity to do that big bang. Maybe a couple times a year you do a big bang test on some environment where you have a code freeze and you dump everything in. But production is really where your big bang test is constantly occurring. So the best way to roll those features out then is to do something like a canary release, collect the metrics, analyze them. How much of that, to me, that sounds a lot like performance, right? But I know some people have, when you're talking about these situations, realistically, how much of the responsibility to advocate for that and take part in that do you all feel lies in a real world performance member?
I think initially the performance specialist engineer member is the one that might have the better idea on how to pull off and which ones might be better, if red, green, blue, or canary, or AB, all the ways that you can start testing these and trying to leverage the resources. But as well, it depends a lot on the organization, who pays attention and sees the value on it, and how can you communicate. But I would say the performance person has to be the one starting to create echo about these possibilities and to suggest the team as Mark was saying, like, hey, ops, can you help me bringing up some secondary environment to implement just for these tests, to do a canary? Can we deviate a bunch of production users to this new environment with this new version to see more or less how it is going, and to not to be automating all the time? I mean, there's no single approach, and the performance engineer is the one with the knowledge or the probably, hopefully, the best ideas on how to start pulling this off given the situations. And hopefully the rest of the organization is listening, but hopefully it's not always easy.
Yeah. So I wanted to also take this back one more place then. Mark, when we first looked at Sting's question, you started getting very agitated, I'll say, and agitated about where's the customer, right? I think that was what you were saying, or where's the user?
They're on there. There's a logo. There's a thing, right? Customer centricity. They put a little person.
But you were like freaking out about it. What was that all about? And did you want to address that?
Yeah, I think it goes hand in hand with what Leandro was just saying in response to your supposition. The idea within such a large framework that you, like you say, production is there's always load happening. Think about what Facebook does with Gorenka's work. I mean, they're like, sure, they do some pre-production load testing, but they're always, doing canary releases. The latest release is, incremental rollouts of everything. They're monitoring everything as they go.
I always get the experience that I get a different version from my friends. Like, what is happening?
No. If you ever are in the public giving a presentation about being a performance tester, they flagged your account already. Give this person, make their traffic go on the test racks. But to that point, they're always with real customers when you're doing that. And I think what I wanted to say is there's people that think about the customer from the straight up customer experience, like support people. Like they're going to get the call, they're going to have someone be unhappy or happy, and they're in direct touch, production support, and that's where they're real customers. And there's other people that think about customers in terms of the top 5 or 10 components or things that are the scariest, riskiest parts of what they're working on. Take a database engineer. These are my 10 hottest tables, my 10 worst queries. If you're an app developer, you know which functions are not asynchronous and can build up on one another. The threading model's not quite right, or they've got to do some local transform that chews up CPU, or it can't be cached properly. If you're a front-end developer, different ways of painting and rendering that are not going to be ideal that you're trying to work through. So I think everyone at small scale upstream tends to get away from what a real customer is. And to your point, Brian, like your job as a performance person is now like, you know what? I need to be able to have that conversation and say, you know what, I can for the release manager, it's like, let me ask the database person, does this hit any of the top 10 tables? They're like, nope. And it's like, okay, so database, we're probably good to go. Let's ask the so-and-so. And do you have any critical rendering things in the front end that call through these functions? Nope. Great. Let's put A and B into canary release, get it out there sooner than later so we can get real customer feedback on it. And so I think that way of sort of facilitating decision-making about releases is something that a performance mind can do, because we can filter out stuff that's probably not going to be a critical section, not going to be a bottleneck, not be, and when something does pop up, then they're like, oh, wait a minute, you are hitting the major logging table? Yeah. Okay, let's do an extra load test round for half a sprint or full sprint before you get this thing in a demo. And I think that is the responsibility of the performance tester, performance engineer to do that. Yeah. But your customers are always somewhere in production. Like so the closer you can stay and get with them and get measurements from them, boy, if you spend too much time away from that, I mean, it can be fun and academic, but it's not necessarily good for your career long term.
Yeah, and I think it's also, speaking of the customer, just always important to remember that that's why you're doing everything you do. And so you should always focus your mind back on that is, but what about the customer, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. But, and they do, there's a customer little icon right in the middle of the graph. So they do get points for that.
All right. Any last thoughts from either of you two on this?
I was saying regarding of the customer that it's very practical and I think smart that you can leverage that there's something going on in production that you can, instead of kind of killing yourself trying to automate all the actions that you can measure, just deviate a little bit of those users to the new version and check if there's any deviation on the performance of the application. And at the same time, focus on your customers being happy with those functions and even with the core functions, as you say, the important tables, the important functions, the methods in your system or services that are crucial or the heaviest hitter, that if you have a new release that messes with them, you should pay extra attention and truly pull off a load test. And going back to the example of the racing car, lap after lap, if you want to try it, you need to pay special attention to the wheel, to the fuel, to the brakes, to the tires. But if the clips that hold the seat or the seat belt or some things that are not truly crucial, I mean, you can go on the whole race without a seat belt. Hopefully nothing will happen and you'll be fine.
Yeah. And it could even be half a seatbelt, but at least you spent time thinking about it. Just said, you know what, you could probably be okay in this release with half a seatbelt, but by the time we put these three other parts together in here, the weight goes up and you need the full seatbelt.
The next time that you get at the pit stop, we'll put the next piece of the seatbelt and you'll be good to go and nice and easy.
Yeah.
And we don't need to lose our heads just because it was your half. But half a wheel, okay, pay attention to that. We cannot be rolling with two or three.
I think people, if you've never worked in Agile, if you jump in the deep end of a very, very large, safe implementation of lean Agile work, you don't expect it to make sense as a performance person, because it's tailored towards put your blinders on, work in a microservice, very narrow scope kind of thing, and just do that all day long and don't ask questions. I'm not saying that they're not, of course you can ask questions, but the idea being that the old days of a single giant monolith is gone. And so all I'm responsible for is a little A and a little B, make sure that those two little guys work as best as they can. So give yourself time to adjust. There's some, obviously at this point, there's some fantastic reading. There's one of the best Agile people I know is Lee Hansen, the Agile Dad. Yeah. So check out Lee's stuff. He does some fantastic coaching, and he'd be a good person to follow. Agile Dad on Twitter.
Today's show is brought to you by Folk Consulting Services. Folk Consulting Services has more than 15 years of experience and is a high-caliber, industry-leading services provider of application performance testing services, monitoring, and management with a strong background in software quality assurance. Folk Consulting has the greatest consultants in the world, and they love growing their customer-focused relationships. Find out more at www.folkconsulting, that's F-O-U-L-K, consulting.com. Well then, thank you once again for listening today, and Stain, thank you for sending the question to us. We hope that you learned a little bit from your response. All of us together now. I sure did.
I did.
Try that again. All of us together now.
I sure did.
Yeah, you guys are great with that.
Well, there's network latency.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah,
right. Exactly.
A big thanks to Mark Tomlinson and Leandro Melendez for helping with today's question. Make sure you check out Perf Bites and Perf Bites Espanol. And if you have a question for Ask Perf Bites or Perf Bites Espanol even, please send your question to ask@perfbites. Follow me at Twitter at askperfbites or at Emperor Wilson. You could follow Mark at
Perf Sherpa.
And you could follow Leandro at
Señor Performo, SR Perf in Twitter.
Perfect. Perfecto. You can always subscribe to Ask Perf Bites on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, Overcast, TuneIn, etc. You can even leave us. Is this voicemail thing still up and running, Mark? So you can leave. So check this out, people. Get a pen and paper.
You can leave us a voicemail, like last century.
77 load perf. That's 775-623-7373. Shipping and handling extra. 775-623-7373. Have you actually gotten any calls, Mark?
Yes, we've had a couple of calls over the years. It's a voicemail. A lot of people don't even use the phone anymore like that.
I know, but I was just curious. That's what I'm asking.
I just like it. It's kind of the irony of it is kind of intentionally ironic. So you can just say at the end, like, operators are standing by.
You know, I should call it some. I've never called it. I should call it sometime.
You should.
So if you also like performance podcasts, check out Pure Performance, which I co-host Andy Grabner. And you can also, obviously, as I mentioned, Perf Bites Espanol and News of the Damned and Perf Bites and any other podcasts you want to give a shout out to, either of you two.
The Test Guild. Our friend Joe Colantonio has a new performance.
That's right.
Test Guild from the Perf Guild, which some of us have been on. And check that out. And then I think Neotis. Doesn't Henrik have some new stuff coming from the kitchen, the performance kitchen?
Oh, he's going to start his chef channel again,
Yeah. So look out for that kind of stuff. There's a couple other really cool new podcasts in the testing space, but I get most of my stuff at the aggregator at testingpodcast.com.
Perfect. So just go there. All right. Cheers, and as always, best of luck in everyone's performance efforts. I'm Brian Wilson. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, guys.
Gracias.
Bye-bye.
Adiós.